Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone is well and safe during this unprecedented time that we're in. I would like to welcome Belinda Allen as a Microsoft VMP and thank her for coming back to present part 2 of Ins and Outs of Power BI.
Thanks so much. So what we're going to be talking about today is the query editor. We're going to be doing a lot of data modeling today. And when I say it's heavy on the demos, I basically mean it's all demos. So we're going to be building some things out. For those of you who use GP, we're going to be building out a payables transaction edit list inside of Power BI so that you could review your payables. If you're not using GP, there is still the bulk of what we're doing here. You're still going to get a lot out of it. You're going to see the modeling of many different tables directly and creating relationships between them and doing appends. And so it's going to be a great journey regardless of whether or not you use GP. So one thing though, if you do use GP, Mainer's going to be sending you guys a template of this report that I'm building out today, the actual one I'm building out, so you could use it with your own GP. If you are not someone who uses GP, then I might try to take time to figure out how to do it with Excel reports so you could tear it apart. We'll see if I can get that done. But anyhow, ask questions during the presentation. I do not mind stopping and taking them rather than taking them at the end. And then I do have a 10-minute warning at the end coming up. At that point, we're going to dump it into all the data modeling we do in the query editor into Power BI, and we'll build out the report there. Yep, I'm only saving 10 minutes for the report. The bulk is going to be query editor, which is the most what you do. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me end my slideshow. And this is Power BI. And it might look a little different. Actually, I think it does since the last time that we met, and that's because there's a new update. If you recall, for those of you who attended last time, a new update happens every single month, and during the month, this last month, we had the ribbon change, so the ribbon looks a little bit different. In the previous version, it actually said edit queries right here. Now it says transform data, but I could still get to the query editor by clicking on transform data. Now, again, this is the Power BI desktop, and as I mentioned last time, I get it from the Microsoft Store, so it automatically updates for me. I don't have to download anything and reinstall, and the good thing about using that version is then everybody in the organization is on this same version. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get my data. For those of you who don't know GP, GP is stored in SQL Server, and it's an on-premises application. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to get my data. So when I click on the Get Data icon, which it looks a little bit different, but it's still the same screen, I'm going to go to Database, and I'm going to go to SQL Server and then Connect. This is where I'm going to connect to the SQL Server itself. Once this gets published into the cloud, then at that point, I'll have to use the gateway, which is free, the part of the gateway, the Azure gateway, personal gateway, whatever they want to, whatever happens to be called today. But the gateway is how the data in the cloud can communicate to the on-premise SQL Server. So we're not here to talk about gateways, but that does have to be installed, and there is not a charge for that. It just needs to be on a machine that has permanent connection to the SQL database, which means it needs to be on all the time. So the first thing it asks me on my SQL Server is what is the name of or to connect to my SQL database, what is the name of my server? And my server name is BusyBee. And I'm going to go ahead and get into the data too. This is one of the GP company databases. And I'm going to go ahead and click on import. And then click OK. The import option is going to bring the data into the in-memory data model as part of my Power BI. So it's going to bring it into the data model itself, and then I can use the data there. This gives you a very quick performance, and this is the way most people who use products like GP or BC or any of the mid-market products would typically work. This is how they would work. So we see our views. We could also get access to tables. Now I'm going to go directly to this SQL tables and get access to the information. So I'm going to look at my cheat sheet over here and start with the payables tables. So as I start typing in the search box here, my search will update, and you can see I have two different icons here. That first one is a SQL view, and the other ones are tables. And I want to get access to the table information. Now, if I'm looking at batches that I want to approve, I need to look at unposted activity. So I'm going to first get my vendor list. You do have to know, understand your data model before where you're accessing before you get into it. So I happen to know PM00200 is the SQL data model. And if you do not know, this is where you need to work with Manor Solutions, and they'll help guide you on your journey into getting the data. And then I'm going to get this PM1000, which happens to be the transactions, the invoices themselves. And you notice I get a preview of them, so I can verify that is indeed the one I want. I also want to get PM, if I thought that was right, 10100, which is where it was coded in the general ledger. So those are my three payables ones. Now, I also want to get some general ledger entries, so I'm going to type in GL. I want to get the, well, general ledger tables, not entries. I want to get the general ledger account master table. And then GP is a little funny. It doesn't have the account description there. I have to go to another table to get that, GL00105. And then I also want to get where GP tracks the name of like a department or something. And in BC world, this would be something similar to, not exactly the same, but similar to a dimension name. So I'm going to get that field as well. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom and choose to transform data. And the query editor is going to open up on my screen, and it's going to connect to those 6 different fields, and it's going to actually import the data into the data model, into the query editor data model. And so here are my tables. And so now I'm going to begin the process of modeling my data. Now, I did a little bit of modeling in the last one, but we're going to do a lot more modeling. And one of the things you're going to find is this is where we spend the bulk of our time when we're building out reports, is making sure the data model is right. And in this particular case, I happen to have 4 data connections all using the same data source, but you could connect to other data sources as well. It does not have to be just one of these. So now I have this set up. So I have, let's see, like the PM00200 is my vendor table. Now, when working in the query editor, I have what I call Belinda's 3 rules. And the first rule is you want to name the query as something that makes sense. And this is why I always say build out the data model or the report for the most technologically challenged person in the company. And if I refer to them as Dumb Dora because I watch too much Match Game, but if I gave this report that had these as the query names to Dora, she would be completely and utterly confused, not being able to detect one from the other. So the first thing we're going to do is come over on the right, swipe over that PM00200, and I'm going to rename that to vendor. Now, this is my vendor master table, and I still have the original source here. If I were to click up there, I can click right into, actually, there we go. Well, that's not the one I want. Let me go to navigation. Yeah. So the navigation one, it would tell me that I actually got PM00200. So it still knows everything that's going on. I just renamed it. And now on the left, you could see the renaming is actually something that's working out well. So I'm going to just go ahead and right mouse click on the next one to show you that you could also rename from over here. So we're going to call this one PM Transaction because that's the invoice itself. So you could either rename on the left or rename on the right. Let's go back to the vendor. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is we want to get rid of columns we do not need. And if you look in the bottom left, you could see in this table, there are 108 columns, and I sure as heck do not need 108 columns. So what I'm going to do now is reduce the number of columns that I see. So I'm going to come up and, I'll go ahead and do this first. So I'm going to come up to choose columns. And when I do that, I get this nice list here so I can easily select without having to right mouse click remove, and so forth. So I'm just going to unselect everything because I don't want anywhere near 108 columns. And now I'll just select what I want. So I want the vendor ID, the vendor name. Oh, in the question, do I want the vendor name or the vendor check name? Good question. So we'll just get the vendor name. And then let's see, that might be all I want. Maybe I want class ID as well. So I'm going to look for the class ID. And this is looking directly into the SQL data. So the field names are not super easy to get. So, oh, you know what? Let's get whether or not the vendor's on hold. And then I'm going to, let's see, where's class? Oh, it's going to be right here somewhere. Oh, there it is, class ID. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I'm down to just 4 columns of data. And so the next rule is to verify the data types. So in this case, vendor ID, I can tell it's a string or a text. One, I have it highlighted, and I can see ABC, which is, if I click on ABC, an indication that that's text. But also, here's vendor name. On the home ribbon, there is this transform area, and I can see this one is text. So that's good. Vendor class ID is text, and hold is set to, this is a decimal number, as I can see here. And this is actually a Boolean field, which means it is yes or no, true or false, 0 or 1. I mean, if they're not on hold, it's 0. Let's see if anybody's on hold. Nope. But if they are on hold, it's 1. So I might want to change this to being a whole number. So I'm going to do that now. But I also probably will want to change this from 0 to 1, or do an if statement and make a change that way. So we'll be working on that as well. Let's go ahead and rename the field. So I have vendor ID. I'm just going to put a space in there. Actually, you know what? Let's make it upper lower and put spaces in. So this is one of the things that will prevent Dora from getting confused, is by creating field names that make sense. So this one, we'll just type in class ID, because we're only working with vendors. And then this one, we'll just leave this, well, we'll call it vendor hold. I was going to do something else, but we'll call it vendor hold. All right, so that takes care of the vendor screen. Now let's move on to the payables transaction. We already did step number 1. Step number 2 is get rid of excess columns. So we have 100, so we don't want that many. I'm going to choose columns. I'm going to go a little bit faster this time. I'm going to get batch number, batch source, voucher number, vendor ID, vendor number, document, source, date. Okay, so I'm just grabbing the top few fields here, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now what I have the batch number, the batch source, the voucher number, which is a unique number for every entry keyed in, vendor ID, and this would be the document number. So this would be an invoice number. And you could get the same invoice number from 2 different vendors, or someone could have a bad system and send you the same invoice number twice. So that's why we have this unique voucher number. So now that I'm looking at this, I see source document is empty, so that's not a field that I need to have listed there. And maybe I want to get the due date too. So the reason why I like using that choose columns is I could always come back in and click on the gear over here in applied steps. And I could say, all right, I do not want source column, but I want due date. So there's the due date right there. And we'll go ahead and click on OK. And now I have the due date. Then the third rule is we're going to make sure everything is set to the right type. And setting the type in the query editor is how the field will act, not how it will appear. So like you notice the document amount, it's set to decimal, which is right, but we don't see it looking like a dollar amount. And that's okay, because we want it to act like a decimal. There's another place where we set how it will look. So this is text. Actually, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to grab all of these columns, highlight them all together. I clicked on the first one. I held the shift key down. I always have to look to see what I do. And then I selected the last column. And now I could easily just come up here and just verify all those are text by reselecting text. Then I have my document type. This would be like an invoice or return or so forth. This one should be a whole number. So I'll select that. Decimal we got, and then the date fields. If it comes from SQL, then it's going to have the date after, or the time after it. And I only want to get the date because GP doesn't track the time. So I'm going to come up to date time, and I'm going to choose date only, and now that's just a date field. So now that I've updated that one, I'm going to come down to the next field, which is my payables distribution. This is where things are coded. So we'll call this one PM distributions, and I'm going to start going faster and faster now as we get through here, because you don't need to see me, you know, go painstakingly over removing all these columns. But this one has 36 columns. There's a lot less. So I'm going to click on choose columns and select all. I need the voucher number so I can connect to the document itself, because if you have an invoice that you've given to somebody, it's at least, because we have a double entry accounting system, going to be coded to two places. The credit will be coded to AP and the debit will be coded to some expense account. So we know that there'll at least be two lines in here for every one line on the payables transaction one. I'm also going to get the distribution sequence number. That is like what row number it is. So if there's two lines, there'll be two unique numbers, one for each line. I'm not going to get control type, but I will get debit and credit. Those are basically just in alphabetical order. Whoever created this table a long time ago put it in alphabetical order in the table, and then it just stayed there. And yes, I know those should be reversed. We'll deal with that later. Then we have the distribution index, which is the link to the account number, and then we need the distribution type. And we might want to get the distribution reference if we have one. So there it is, distribution reference. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now we're down to just 7 columns, and I can quickly check these. How did I put the voucher number here? I made the voucher number here a string. So I want to make sure, or text. So I want to make sure this one is text. So we have voucher number as text, and that's the only one. That's fine. This one is a whole number. 123 means it's a whole number. Then we have our 2 decimal places. That's good. Distribution index, a whole number. Distribution type, we'll make that a whole number. And then our distribution reference is text. So now I just need to come in. Oh, I did not rename these. So let's rename all of these. Batch number. And I left batch source in here just in case you want to determine whether or not it's approved. So that is something that you could use. So we'll say batch source, voucher number, and then we have the vendor ID. Then we have the document number. Now the document type, I'm going to leave that just like it is, and we'll call this one document amount. We'll call this one document date, and then we'll call this one due date. Back to distributions, we have voucher. I'm going to leave the this distribution sequence number just as it is. It's not a field that we're going to show to Dora, so we don't need to worry about it. So we'll call this one credit, call this one debit. The distribution index number, we're going to leave that as because we're just using it to create a link to the account number. The distribution type, we'll leave that as is, and the distribution reference will come in and enter in distribution reference. Okay, now we're down to the account field. So here, these are the account master. So you notice in the distribution reference, we did not actually have the account number. We just had this identifier, this unique link. This is like an ID to the account number. So we need to make sure that we have that field in here, and here it is, account index. And we need to make sure that the type is set the same. So this is a number. We want to make sure it's a number in here. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead. We do not want 44 columns, so let's open this up. We'll go to account index, and I normally would not put these 3 individual links in here. I would just extract them if I want, but I want to show you a little bit of fun things we could do here. And then we could add some other pieces of information in here if we're interested, but I say, let's not include anything else, so we'll go ahead and click OK. So now we have this set, and we want to set the type. So the account index is the whole number. That's good. And then these are set up as strings right now, and that's probably how I want to keep them, because if I change them to a number, the 00 is just going to become a 0, and the 01 will become 1. And I want it to act like a string, so I'm going to leave those as is. So now that we've got that done, we'll come down here, we'll get the account description, our account name. This one I'll go through very, very quickly. Only 2 fields we want here, the account index and actually the account number, not account name. Speaking of which, those of you who know your data well probably are thinking, Belinda, you left off the account description, and I did. And that's string, so we'll call this account. We'll just call it account. We better put account name. All right, so this particular table does not have the full account number as one full string, so I have to get that from here. I'm going to leave that called account index, but we'll call this one account number. And then the last one, what I want to do is I want to be able to connect to the department and use the department. So I'm going to call this one department. This is where you could go in and say, hey, if it's segment number 1 and it's 100, it's administration. So this is what I want to get. So what I'm going to do here for this one, I'm going to do something a little bit different. First of all, I'm going to verify my data. I get rid of excess columns first. So let me do that. So I do not want Dex row ID or time or node or segment count. I just want which segment it is, the ID, and the name. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And I'm going to verify these types. So this will be whole number, text, and description. All right. What I'm going to do is, now that I have that done, I'm going to right mouse click and over here on the left, and I'm going to choose to duplicate that entry. And so let's go back to department for a moment and finish out department. Department for me is segment number 1. So I only want segment number 1. There's segment number 1. And I'm going to remove that column because it filtered the column first, and then I have it where I can remove it. And then we'll call this one department ID. And we'll call this one department. Now I'm going to come down here to where I have department number 2, and I'm going to call this query sub account. And what I'll do here is the same step. The only difference is I'm going to get segment number 3. And now it narrows down segment number 3. And unfortunately, we don't have any descriptions populated, but we could, if we, if it was out there, we could have added it. So I'm going to remove. So what I'm trying to do is give us the ability to look at, like a department, what are all of the transactions coded to the admin department or to sub account 04. So we'll call this one sub account ID, and then we'll call this one sub account. So if it was populated, it would be usable. All right, cool. Now that we've done the individual modeling of these transactions, I could, in theory, just publish this to or close and apply this to the Power BI report and then use the relationship there to connect it together. But I want to make things easier. I can actually do some data relationships in a way here by utilizing some other fields like merge, and append. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's start with the account and the account number. If I want to add the account number field to the account table or query so I could use it in here, I could do that. Now, a couple things I could do. I could select all 3 of these segments. I could choose to right mouse click and choose to merge, or on the home ribbon, choose merge at the very top. So I'm going to choose merge, and I could separate this with, I don't have a dash, but I can go to custom and add a dash, and I could choose to merge them as a single account number. Now, a couple things you'll notice. The first one is there's blank spaces there. One of the things that's telling me is that wherever the data is stored, it actually has blank spaces at the end of it. So I need to trim up those blank spaces. So I'm going to get rid of merged for a moment. I'm going to highlight all three of these segments of my accounts. And for those of you using BC, we have like one natural account segment, and the other ones are something very similar to dimensions, but we pre-match them all up to create the full account number uniquely. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of these, and I could either right mouse click and choose transform and trim, or I could go to transform and pull the transform ribbon up, and then I could choose format and trim. In any event, I'm getting rid of the blank spaces at the end of it, the trailing spaces that you don't see. So now if I were to go in and merge these columns together and separate them with that dash, I could see my full account number. And I could have gotten the account number from here if I wanted to, and that would have been okay, but I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that merged column, but I'll leave the trim step there. But instead, I chose to get it directly from here. So either way will work just fine on doing that. So what I want to do is I want to take the account number that's here and add in the full account number so it becomes a whole separate field. So I have a whole separate column. So I'm going to highlight this account query, and then on the home ribbon, I'm going to choose to merge the query. Now, if I click on the words merge the query, it takes me right to this window. If I click on the arrow, I have an option. I can either merge and create a whole new query or just merge the account number into this one. And I'm going to just merge the account number into this one, which pulls up this window. So now I have the account number here, and I want to bring, or the account table, and I want to bring in the account number field. And what I have to do is select the matching table. So here is the account index and the account index. So I just highlight these, and now I can see down at the bottom there is a match for every single row, and there should be, knowing I understand how my data works, so there should be. So 500 out of 500 match up, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I get this weird column that says table is the answer there. So what I'm going to do is just click on the double-headed arrow, and that account number is actually the name of the query. That's how it popped up. But I don't want to use the name of the query as part of the query, or as part of the field. I don't want it to say account number dot account number. So I'm going to uncheck this use original column name. I don't need the account index. I just want the account number. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I have my account number field here. And then just for good measure, let's right mouse click and choose to trim this up as well. And now we have a nice trim account number. And so we have each of our individual segments, and we have our full segment over here. Now we still need the account index because that's how we're going to connect it to the distributions. But now we have this nice account table listed. Now let's deal with these. We've already trimmed the spaces on these. So what I want to do is come down to my department, and I'm going to make sure that I trim the space here. So I right mouse click, transform and trim. So those will match up, and I'll do the same with my sub department. Transform and trim. All right, cool. So got those done. Now I'm going to come back up here to where I have my master account segment, and I want to add in the name if it's segment 1, and I want to add in the name if it's segment 2. That's all I'm going to do. So what I'll do is, actually, you know what? I'm going to leave those just as it is. Yeah, I'll leave those as it is. I'm not going to merge everything in. All right, so now that I have that set up, sorry, I was just thinking on the fly. I don't want this query to be part of the data model when I bring it in, because all I wanted to do was get the account number. So what I'm going to do over here on the left is right mouse click, and I'm going to uncheck enable load. And then you notice it becomes italicized. Now you still see the data here, but what's going to happen is when the data gets applied to the Power BI, it's not going to include that data as part of the subset of data because I already have that account number filled here. Oh, and I can see I have the name here. It says account number. Let me just change that to account number. And it did that because the name of the query was account number. And then let me change the names up here. I'm going to call this one department ID. And then we'll call this one natural account. And then we'll call this one sub account. Oh, I forgot the word ID at the end. Oh, we'll leave natural account there. Okay. Cool. So we have all that done. So we have our account set up. Let's do something very similar with the payables transactions. We want to do a little bit more cleanup here. So here, for every invoice I have out there, there should be at least 2 entries in here. Now, also, when I'm looking at the payables distribution one, I happen to know that this is looking at, includes not only unposted transactions here, but it also includes things that have been posted but not paid yet. And this is why I left. Did I not leave it on? I did not leave it on. So let me come back up to remove other columns. I need to get the document status here, or the posting status. So let me find that. There you go. So I've got the posting status on here now, and I'm going to change that to a whole number. And because I'm still up here on the applied step where the remove other column is, it's going to ask me about inserting that step, which I will. And so it inserted that step for me, and I'll come down. So now I have this posting status of 0 or 1. Now this is not a Boolean field. This is something, and I'm cheating and double checking with my notes over here. 0 means unposted, 1 means posted. And if you were looking at something that also included history, 3 would be, well, it would say probably 2 in there, or it might go 1, 2, and 3 instead. But I know 0 is unposted and 1 is posted. I do not want anything that's posted because this is just for editing. So I'm going to unmark that step. And now that I'm only looking at my posted transactions, our unposted transactions, I can right mouse click and remove that column. So now I have that column available right here, or no longer have that column, and I'm only looking at unposted transactions. And you can see in this case, there are 2 lines for voucher 457. And if I go to payables transaction over here, I should see, let me resort these. There is 157 right here. So there's 1 line for that one, and it matches nicely with the other line. All right, cool. So now that we have the distribution information here, we could and probably should try to bring these pieces of information together. Now, that's going to be pretty easy to do because we have the voucher number. It'll be easy to bring in the batch number, the batch source, the vendor ID, the document number, the document type, which the document type is going to be invoice or some of the other ones. So we might want to clean that up first. But the next question we have is, do we want to bring over the full document amount? This is the grand total of the invoice. And if we look in distributions, these are entered in by debits and credits. You can see $50 credit, $50 debit. So we need to figure this scenario out as well. So a lot to do. We also are dealing with the, where is it? Here we go. This is the account index. It's called something different here. Distribution, oh, that's a sequence number. Where's the account index? Oh, here it is, distribution index. This is the account index. So if a full number, whole number, just like we had in the other ones. And then we have the distribution type. We need to learn what those are so that we can evaluate by those as well. So let's start by coming into the payables transactions. We do not have the vendor name, so if I open this up, I can come in and connect those two together and add in the vendor name, the vendor class, and the vendor hold. So let's do that first. So I'm going to start with the payables transactions. Once again, I'm going to merge queries, and I'm going to merge in the vendor master with the payables transaction. And so I'll select by vendor ID and by vendor ID. Now I can see these are matching. If for some reason they don't match, and then probably as a good measure, you should go ahead and run trim on everything that you're going to link together just to ensure that you'll have some success there. But I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I have my vendor table out here, vendor query. It remembered that I do not want to include the vendor name. I don't need the vendor ID again. I already have that, but I do want the vendor name, the class ID, and whether or not the vendor's on hold. Cool. Got all that in. That looks good. Let's come up to the vendor and let's right mouse click and remove that from loading as well. Back to transactions. Let's do a little bit of cleanup here. First of all, let's make the hold either be a yes or a no. So there are a couple things we could do. The first one is we could do the equivalent of an Excel find and replace. So I have this highlighted. So what I'm going to do is come to transform and choose to replace values. So I'll say if it's 0, then I'm going to put not on hold. And I'm going to click. Oh, actually, I can't do that because that's set to a whole number. So let me set that to text. And now I can do a find and replace. So if it's 0, not on hold, and I'll click OK. And so that one, it happens to show all of them, but I need to account for if one of them happens to be on hold. So I'm going to do another replace. And if it's 1, I'll put on hold and then go ahead and click OK. And this creates 2 separate steps, and you should be renaming all your steps so you know where you are. You could just right mouse click on rename and then rename it. But this creates 2 steps just to make those changes. So that's fine if you only have 2, that works out well. But in the case of the document type, we could have up to 7. I had to look at my cheat sheet. So we want to make sure we have all 7 accounted for. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a whole new column based off of the number that's in here. So I'm going to click on Add New Column or Add Column on the menu at the top, and then I'm going to choose Add a Conditional Column. And it brings up this nice little wizard type window, and I'll call this Document Type. And then I will look for the column name called Doc Type. There it is. If the data on that row is equal to 1, the output must be invoice. And now I could go through and add in more clauses. I'm going to do that now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So I'm going to repeat the steps. If it's equal to 2, it would be finance charge. If the doc type is equal to 3, and you could have a view that does all this for you automatically since it's coming out of SQL. But I just wanted you to see how you can really get in and edit things, because not everything is always going to be this as organized as a SQL database would be. So there's a return document type equals credit memo if it's a 5, and the document type equals a 6. It would be a payment. Otherwise, it's a 7, which is a scheduled payment. Now, frequently, I will put, knowing there are only 7 types, I'll put all 7 in up here, and in the else, I'll put other or problem or something like that so that I know I have an issue. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This just adds 1 step, and it adds this new column. And the column up here now says ABC 1, 2, 3, which means it doesn't know. So I'm going to click on that and make sure it's set to text. Now I no longer need that doc type column. So I'm going to scroll back all the way over here, or look for it. Where did it go? Doc type. Transaction. There it is, doc type. I'm going to right mouse click and remove that one. So that took care of that issue. So now I can see what kind of document it is when I'm looking at it. I can see whether or not the vendor was on hold. I can narrow it down by vendor class. I can see the vendor name. Let me get rid of the 0 there. Again, that put that .1 because the field for the query was already there and the query was named vendor, the column was named vendor, and so it didn't want to make sure there wasn't a duplication. All right, so I have all of this set. This looks really good. Now what I probably want to do, because I have the voucher number, I could do it, is connect some of the distribution to this. So before I do this though, let's add in the account number so we don't have to see the account index. And that might make things a little bit easier to see, or we could just leave the account index there if we wanted to. But let's go ahead and make a connection to the account number so that when we're dealing in Power BI, it's account number to account number. And so frequently the person who's doing the data modeling has a better understanding, or hopefully has a good understanding of their data, where the person who is doing a lot of the report writing, if they're out there, then we typically don't want them to see things like the distribution index. It would just confuse them. And again, it's just a unique identifier of the account number. All right, so what I'm going to do here is come back up to the home ribbon. I'm going to choose to merge a query here, and I'm going to merge this with account. And I'm going to say I want the distribution index matched to the account index. And you can see I have this full match here. I get, once again, the double-headed arrow. So the only thing I want here would be the account number. So now I have the account number. So I'll continue to use the account table, but now I can have the account number here, which means I can now get rid of the distribution index and I can see where it was coded. This also means I can come into the account area over here and I can get rid of or remove the account index from here. And that's because, oops, oh, sorry, I could not do that. Hello, let's go back. The reason why I couldn't do that was because it was required up here. So we'll just have to make sure we hide it. Fortunately, it said, hey, you got an error, Belinda, pay attention, girly. All right, so now that I have all that done, we have the distribution type here. And probably a smart thing to do would be to add another conditional column right here. And on this one, we'll call this one distribution type. And on this one, we could have 20. We're not, right now, I will not go through 20. I'm only going to do a few distribution types. It looks like everything is a 6R2, so we'll just stick with 6R2 for right now. If it's a 2, if the distribution type is equal to a 2, that would be payables. Otherwise, it must be a 6, which is the purchase amount. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, so we'll have that in. And I'm going to make that text, and I could get rid of the distribution type here now because this column was created afterwards. All right, so now I have all my columns set. A couple of things I do want to show you before we move on though is you saw me duplicate a column. You saw me merge columns. You could split columns too if you want to. So I'm just going to very quickly just highlight this column, and I'm going to choose to split by. And I could choose to split by a delimiter or a number of characters. Let me start by a delimiter. And now I could say, oh, right, where the dashes are. Split at every dash or just the left dash. And when I click OK, now you can see I have segment 1 and segment 2. And this is where I was talking about. It tried to figure out what the data type was. It said, hey, there's a number there. Looks like a whole number. So it got rid of a lot of those zeros. But here's where it changed the type. If I have a couple things I could do. I could either change the type back by coming in and saying this is text, and it says, hey, wait a minute, I tried to guess what the type was. Do you want to replace this step or do I want to add a new step? And if I click on replace step, then it would just simply replace that step. Or I could have just come in and gotten rid of it right here, either one. I don't want to split that. But also, I could have come in and split the columns by a number of characters. So I could have come in and said, I want to split by the 4 characters on the left. And now if I click OK, you could see how it tries to split those 4 characters. This time I'll just get rid of that and I could see the 4 characters there. So those are some of the things I could do as far as splitting it up. And sometimes that's super helpful being able to do that. All right. Oh, while we're here, let's come in. Oh, we should be okay there. All right. I wanted to make sure and trim that, but I copied it over, so trimming it would be just fine. Another thing that you could do is you can, let me come into, let's say department for a moment. I'm going to add a column here. And what I'm going to do is add a column from examples. And when you do this, I now get this new column over here on the right, and I could just call this department with ID, and then I could start typing in. And so if I want 000 dash and nothing, or the name of the name, so there's the department name, and then I'm going to, whoops, let me go back up here, 000 dash, and then I want that department name there. I'm going to leave that blank, but on this one, I'll do 100 dash, and then I'll start typing in the word administration, and then pressed enter. And you notice how it picked up everyone that had that. So now I've created this new field, and if I click OK, I have a brand new field here that was done based off of an example of some other field. So that's another way you could easily write some things. So that's pretty cool. Let me go in. We're 4 minutes from my warning time. A couple other things I wanted to do real fast. We have the payables transactions listed up here. I was going to bring some of the information in here, so let me grab it. Payables, let me go to distributions. So I'm going to come over and merge that in as well. There's also an append, so if you have things with similar columns, you could append if you wanted to. So that it would just take all the data from two different tables, and every row in each of those two tables would have its own unique row inside of whatever new query you're doing. All right, so now I'm going to grab, I've got the PM distributions, and I want to grab payables transactions. I'm going to connect these by voucher number. And so I don't have any connections right there. So it might be that there's some blank spaces at the end. So I'm going to just quickly transform this. I'll trim this one. And then I'm going to come over to voucher here and trim this one. Now let me come back and try again. Merge query, get payables transaction, voucher number, and voucher number. Now I have all 30 selected. And that's because all those zeros, 457 space doesn't match this one with no spaces. So now I have all those connected, and I can come in and add in all of the fields that I want to add. I do not need voucher number again. I already have that. So we don't need to populate that one, but we'll go ahead and add all the other data to this. And now that we've done that, I'm going to come up to payables transactions and remove the load there. And now that we have this all set up, I'm going to leave this unique identifier out here. We'll just call it line number. We'll hide it when we get over there. Now that I've got that, I'm going to scroll over here to where we have the due date. Perhaps I want to see how many days it is until this is due. A couple of things I could do here. If I come up to add column, I could go to the date area here, and I could choose to age it. And if I do that, it's going to show me how many days until this is due. Now it starts out with, there's some dots there. That is the number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Now I only want the days. So instead of it being a duration, I'll click right there. Right now it's set to time, or actually it's set to duration. I'm going to change it to be a whole number, which will then just show me the number of days. So that's how many days in the future it's due. And so if it's in the future, it's negative, and I don't want it to be negative. So what I'm going to do is, with this column highlighted, I'm going to come up to transform. And now, because this is a numerical field, the number column area is lit up. And I'm going to choose standard. I'm going to multiply this times a -1. So now if it's due in the future, it'll be positive, and if it's due in the past, it'll be negative. So now we have this number of days due. And so that's good. And a couple other things that I could also do. I think I got through most of the things that I wanted to do. perhaps I want to see a breakdown, have a separate query that shows me all of this information broken down by the dollar value. I could see the whole dollar value of each GL account number. What I'm going to do is right mouse click one more time and choose to duplicate.
Belinda, I hate to interrupt you in the middle, but it's your 10-minute warning.
Thank you so much. Okay. And from here, I just wanted to show you this. You could click on group by, and you could group by certain things. So if I wanted to group by account number, and now instead of counting rows, I'm going to go to advanced and add another grouping. So there's account number. And actually, let me change this from count rows to sum up the credit line and add another one to sum the debit line. And I need to give it a name. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. And we did not mean to leave the voucher number there. Let me get rid of that. Delete that. Click OK. And now for every account number, I can see a grand total there. And then we'll just call this payables summary. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up by putting it into report. On the home, I'm going to go to close and apply. And now you're going to notice that I'm not going to see all of those queries here. We had 6 queries we connected to. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We added a 7th, which was the sub account, and then we added an 8th, which was the distribution summary. And so now if you look, we don't have anywhere near that many. We have 5. We only see the ones that appear. And so let's go through and create relationships between these. And it looks like it tried to create relationships automatically for us. So the account summary one, let's remove the relationship between the payables distribution and the summary, because that would just confuse things. I'll double click on it, and actually probably be easier if I just right mouse click and delete that relationship. And so now I have this relationship, and if I double click on this, I can make it active. There we go. So every account number will appear once in the summary, but on multiple, actually it's 1-to-1. So I could get more information on it there. So that's now active. Department, sub-account, all of these are now working fine. And if I were to go and look at, let's see, gotta stop and look because we are, whoops, remember I said this changed a little bit. There we go, manage relationships. Okay, so the department ID and department ID are connected, sub-account, the distributions in the account number, and then the summary in the account number. So that looks good. So we have our relationships all set up. Let's go ahead and create our distribution report to make it look easier. What I'm going to do is come in and choose the matrix visualization. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one first. And let me just stretch this out. And what I'm going to put here, I'm going to go into the distribution over here, and I'm going to put in, let's start by maybe putting in the vendor ID. Here's the vendor ID. Let's put in the vendor name, and I'm just going to start clicking. Don't want vendor name in column. I'm going to put it in rows, and then I'm going to put in the document type, the document number, the document date. Now I don't want to see all of those years. Actually, let's keep going down so we can see everything that we're doing so far. I don't want it to show all those individual, like year and month and so forth. So I'm going to change this from being a hierarchy to just looking at the date. So now I can see the document date listed there. And it's interesting how it's displaying. I must have that in, I don't know how I have that displaying. We'll figure it out in a moment. And then let's come in and maybe put in the voucher number underneath that. And then we want to get the account number perhaps, and put it there. And then let's also get the debit amount and credit amount, and let's populate those in the values. Now, there's no point in moving the debit before the credit in the query editor because it's going to automatically sort them in alphabetical order here. So might as well leave them. So now we have debit and credit amounts. Don't worry, I'm going to make it look good. And then we are going to take the distribution reference or the distribution type and put it in columns. So now we can see payables and purchasing and so forth as we go along. All right, now that we have that done, when you're doing visuals, sometimes formatting provides functionality and not just pretty colors. So I'm going to come into the paint roller icon while I have this visual selected, and I'm going to go to row headers, and on the row headers there's this option called step layout, and I'm going to turn it off. That's the equivalent of taking a pivot table in Excel and setting it to show tabular instead of outline mode. And I'm going to close that up, and now I'm going to go to subtotal, and I'm going to turn off the row subtotal. So now I could see by each line what's listed here, and I need to go down one more. Did I not get the account number? Let's see, let's come back over here. And I did get the account number, but it's after the voucher number. So let me, actually, you know what? Let me get rid of vendor ID. And we should be able to see it then. A little junky, but we can still see it. So let's change the way our data is displaying, and that'll save some room. So what I'm going to do is over on the right, I'm going to select that document date, and then it changes automatically in this newer version of Power BI to column tools, which is a whole new menu option. And I could change how it's formatted or how it displays right here. So there's the data type that we set, but we want to change this. So it just shows us the date in a simple date form, and that gives us a little bit more room. So now we should have enough room for everything, so we could see all of that information. So this is, I think, a really cool, and you could repeat some of those fields if you want to, but I think it's a really cool way of looking at your data. Let me come in quickly, and actually I'm going to click off of that visual and then go to the paint roller and put just a little bit of background color on here. So I'm going to do page background, just grab a blue and set the transparency down a little bit so that we could see that stand out. All right, so now what I want to do is come in and put in a slicer or two. So I'm going to put in the first slicer. We're almost done, I promise. And then we'll put in the batch number in that slicer. So now as I'm looking at this, I could just look at an individual batch and figure out what's going on. We'll probably want to get those subtotals off the columns too. There we go. All right. So on that saved room too. All right. So now here's my batch number. I'll just do Control C, Control V. Let's also come in and make this one like vendor class ID. So I'm just going to drop class ID on top of that. Whoops. And that actually made a hierarchy, which is another new feature. And I don't want it to be a hierarchy. So I'm going to click back on fields here and get rid of batch. I want batch number. I want class. So let me put class back. I think I got rid of both of them. So here's the vendor class. So as I select these, my vendor class should update accordingly to show me which classes are available. So now I'm going to copy and paste again, and I might want to put in here I could put in the document type, or I could put in the distribution type. Let me get rid of class ID. So now I can narrow it down for the distribution. And this is by far an easier way of looking at your data to see how things are coded. You might even want to just come in and put in, let's see, let's come in and add a department in this one. So we'll put a department in. So now I have my departments, and one more that we might want to add. Let me slide these over a little bit. And this one, we might want to put in the full account number or whether or not the vendor is on hold. So now if I go in and say, all right, I know this one is my payable. So when I'm looking at this, I should only see the distribution type or payables, and I can evaluate whether or not everything's going. So that is my my whole little spiel here. I know I went through a lot, but that's just an example of a data modeling process that you would go through while you're building out a report. Okay, great. Other than that, I wish everyone safety for yourself and your family, and keep your distance.
I also,
Other than that,
yep. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Belinda, for presenting such great information to us. And
Thank you.
repeat, be safe, and everyone stay well. Thank you.
Bye.